Back again for another video. On today's topic, we'll be discussing an aspect of female language that is commonly used to shame men. And it's somewhat controversial and it's been somewhat discussed. Once again, I like to bring forth the things that are fundamentals, the origins of things, right? Where they start out at and how to point them out, because I think the foundation of these things are very important, because in order to understand how to defend yourself against something, you have to be informed about it first at its grassroots existence. But anyways, today's topic will be, if he critiques women, then he must be gay, right? I, once again, know this is something that has been debunked. And I mean, any rational man can pretty much put this together. Rational woman as well, even the women who say it, don't believe it a lot of times, because they are back and forth between supporting gay rights and critiquing gay rights. They don't know where they land. But nonetheless, we're not talking about the objectivity of the ideology itself in the statement, but rather the statement and what it's meant to do, and also why it's said. That's what I'm here to discuss mostly. So anyways, I run across it a lot, and it's not because I myself am gay or any of the men in the space that I am in within that conversation where that said are gay, but rather just because we're dealing with a space where this is a critique or an ideological view that is being discussed, and there are some women who disagree with it. And usually this critique or ideology pushes back on the existence that the gynocracy has set up for itself, its validation in its existence, and how it expresses itself. Anything that goes against that is pushed back on, especially with this topic of calling and referring to a man as being gay. You have a problem with weave, you're gay. You have a problem with content. I mean, I remember back in the early 90s, color contacts were a huge thing, especially in the Black community, and that got pushed down really fast by Black men. From what I understood, Black men did not really like that at all. But once again, these were one of the things that Black men got called gay behind, because we didn't want women who wore fake contacts, especially some hideous color, like purple. I don't know. Not saying that purple itself is hideous, but for an eye color, especially in a contact, that's very gaudy to me. That's almost like costume jewelry at this point. But nonetheless, it was a topic that was discussed very heavily in the early 90s, was colored contact lenses, especially in the Black community. And Black men pushed back on it very strongly, very strongly. I think even the simps did not like these things. So you don't see many women these days wearing colored contacts anymore. I mean, granted, people still have eye stigmatisms and such things like that. So it's not that they're not wearing contacts, but rather they're not choosing to wear the outrageous colors, because once again, the men pushed back on it. The voice was heard even well before social media was a thing. It was kind of a undertone that was throughout our version of media, which was through outlets of comedy, things like that, sitcom shows, all these kinds of things, the ridiculous things, because it was pushed very heavily on our popular shows during the 90s, what the message was that we wanted to get to women. We had to package it in some entertaining way. That's why the whole ideology behind, what was her name on Martin? What was it? Shaniqua? And how outrageous that character was. But we don't really see that many of them in these days and spaces anymore, because it got socially pushed down through the stigmatization from Black men's voices and the way they choose to express themselves at that point in time in the 90s. So there's probably a little bit more history to it, but I'm not going to go into that. But nonetheless, the voice was heard. But once again, men were called to be other than straight heterosexual men, and their sexuality was somehow now in question because they had a critique of women in such a way. It seems like no matter where you go, no matter where you are, if you end up in a space, whether it be real or virtual, and you critique a woman's exterior appearance or the way she carries or behaves in a public or private setting, then your sexuality must be in question. Every single time. Every single time. I know I've talked about this before, and it was dealing with, I think it was dealing with Kevin Samuels about how that he critiques women. Granted, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, and I'm not even a subscriber of his channel. I mean, I've caught a few of the things that he's talked about, but it's not my cup of tea, because it's the equivalent of cackling with females to me. It's not really progressive, and I mean it exposes a few things, but as far as getting things done, I can't necessarily say what that is. But nonetheless, he has a show once again, and he critiques black women a lot, all women a lot, from what I understand. All people, he critiques males too, but it seems that he's turned into this face of a black woman hater, and behind that is the subtle voice of he's gay, that black women are spewing behind this, because he has a rhetoric that does not support what the gynocracy stands for. This is more of an ideological war rather than black men against black chicks, or single mothers against fathers with no kids, or that the reason why a lot of these talking points get muddled is because people like to throw in the demographics, right? They say, well, I'm not a single mother, I'm not this, I'm not that, or men will say, especially black men, they will say, I'm not a Pookie or Ray Ray, or, I'm not a thug type of dude, or, I got my life together, I used to do those things. They go towards the arguments of putting oneself forward as an example of what they stand for, or either what they stand against. And that's where the conversation becomes less productive. Because once again, this is an ideological war. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your demographics per se. Yes, at a lot of times, in a lot of corners, it is the demographic of the black community, but in the whole of the black community, it is not about the demographics. A lot of times, when we say that, for instance, when we say that half of black men do not have children and never been married, we're not talking about a 60-year-old man per se. We're not talking about a 15-year-old child per se. You see what I'm saying? We're talking about a specific group that's in a specific age range that meets a criteria, but is a large portion of black men, right? So we're talking about a majority, right? And not just percentage wise, but per demographic, right? So we're not even arguing we're not saying 50% of black men under 5'8" don't have children. Like we're not adding anecdote, subjective things to this, because we're talking about the whole rather than a section. While the demographics while the statistics themselves are talking about a section, that is the demographic. But when people try to argue these things, they say, well, I know a dude who's got 12 kids and, this and that. And, that has nothing to do with the statistic at all, because that's anecdote versus the statistic itself, which isn't subjective. I guess it can be subjective when paired against any, counterfacts. You know what I'm saying? But people aren't using counterfacts. They're using their own personal experiences and their own personal accounts to argue and go against something that is a statistical fact, right? But this is the realm that the gynocracy works in. We know that the gynocracy does not work in the realm of facts, and if it does, it's very cherry picked facts. Even sometimes with red pill ideology, the facts can be very cherry picked itself. So I don't tend to subscribe to a whole component of red pill ideology. While I do attest to some of these things being true, and I do speak about some of these things on my channel, this is not the whole conceptual view of what my rhetoric comes from, right? But for the gynocracy, it is, because it's all ideological. Because if they were to actually go to the facts, they lose every single time. This brings me back to my point. When you run into a group of women, or you run into maybe just one woman, it seems that, well, not even that. Let's back it up even a little further. When you actually state something that is against the gynocracy, there's a radar that goes off. It pings somewhere. And usually some gynocratic official is going to come and try to put you back in check. And especially if it's about the physical appearance for some reason, and it's not necessarily happen to do, and I find that it's not something to do with, for instance, if a woman has more than one child, or if a woman is, what can I think of? I mean, all these other topics that have nothing to do with her appearance. If it is her appearance, it's or the way that she behaves, and it's being critiqued as a man saying that I don't want to deal with this type of woman, they're coming for your sexuality. They're coming to get that. They're coming to check you against the board of their ideological views. Because for some reason, I don't know, well, I kind of know who told black women this, but most BWs, they tend to believe that they hold the monopoly on the ideological view of what is straight and what is homosexual. They think that they hold the monopoly on that. And this monopoly wasn't necessarily given to them. It was in context of what homosexual is, but as far as defining it within a culture according to behavior and not necessarily instance of where there is actual homosexuality, is where they're using it and how they're using it. They're using it to say, well, if you don't agree with the way I look, then you must be gay, right? And rationally, that makes no sense. But for some reason, in the realm of the gynocracy, this is a valid statement, and it's unilaterally accepted most times within the gynocracy itself. The gynocracy is a very fantastical world. They operate on rules that do not exist anywhere else in the world. I mean, granted, the gynocracy can be anywhere in the world, but nonetheless, it is an ideological view that when you step outside of it, it does not exist. And more than likely, when you step outside of it, you will see the clear contradiction of its existence in itself. A lot of the things that the gynocracy puts up are nothing but propaganda. That's all it is. When it comes to calling black men a certain thing, propaganda, it's an old machine. It's the same thing that is a remnants of the 1990 shows that painted black men as such a thing. And for some reason, that is passed down in the culture as well. But the problem of it is that it has not been updated within social media. Social media is a amateur based thing, meaning that the average person can create something for themselves as a representation of themselves, right? And they no longer need a representative such as media outlets, like, for instance, talk TV shows and, the news and radio to represent them anymore. They can represent themselves. But once again, the talking points of the gynocracy have not been updated to suit the power of social media. Clearly, once again, if someone like Kevin Samuels was actually gay, I think that probably would have been came out by now. I mean, for the fact that he has children to my knowledge and he was married more than once. I mean, people would say, oh, well, there are men in the closet who stay in the closet for years, the whole argument again, the remnants of the 90s and before, like the 80s and stuff like that, those talking points will come back up. But social media has this ability of accelerating things, especially when it comes to the truth. The truth comes out very fast. This is the reason why the gynocracy alters itself a lot. But one thing that they have not altered, once again, is the propaganda machine telling the world that black men are gay if they do not meet this certain criteria that they have created to define what a straight man is. And usually that's a simp, of course. But the world is watching. The world is looking. The world is always looking out for these things that the gynocracy claims to be true, such as a heterosexual man actually parading around as being straight when he's closet gay. When, once again, the gynocracy believes this, but it's yet to be seen once they step outside of their own ideology. This is the reason why a lot of these things don't hold up and hold firm. But it seems that in the social spaces, this is still used. This is still used as a shaming language. And I'm just wondering when the gynocracy is going to update their lexicon. They're going to update their definitions of how they apply these things of propaganda to the individual to I guess you can say, socially slur them into being viewed as different than what they are. The gynocracy is a very outdated system, even in, once again, the social media space, because they no longer have the ability to dictate and say what black men are based upon the criteria that they believe applies to them, right? Because once again, social media is an outlet for the amateur. We can get on here and we can speak for ourselves, and we can let our actual lives show and be the definition that supersedes and snuffs out those accusations of actually being gay. I don't know why these women still use this. It is a very outdated system. It no longer works. We see what you're doing, but it's not working. Trying to shame black men into accepting the flaws that we see that can actually be changed, the flaws that are perpetuated through the dysmorphia that the individual has about their own self-image can be changed. It is often that the gynocracy itself likes to project their own dysfunctions onto other people. They believe that the way they see themselves is the way that the world and the individual that they're focusing on sees themselves, meaning that there is some level of contradiction. There's some level of delusion to their self-image. That is a projection in itself, not necessarily saying that just because the BW, the average BW, the wild BW, sees themselves as being beautiful with all these lopsided BBLs and these butterfly eyelashes as being beautiful, that thus the person that is critiquing that is also seeing themselves in a dysmorphic state. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying here is that they understand that there's something wrong with their view of themselves, and they see this as being an attack of the propaganda that they want to push. This is no different than the fat acceptance movement to me, because they want to push the ideological view that something is what they say it is, and actually not what it actually is. That 300 pounds is acceptable to them because of their fantastical self-ideological views of dysmorphia, that somehow the world should accept it because they feel beautiful in this state. When actually we know behind the scenes, a lot of these women are very self-conscious and have many insecurities about their weight and wish that they could lose it, but they choose to do nothing about it, of course, in most cases. Not all, but most. And then it turns into, once again, a projection that if anyone critiques a woman's size, then he, of course, must be gay. Because if we like it, why don't you like it? There's got to be something wrong with your sexuality. I'm attracted to me. Gaslighting all the way down the hallway as they scream in your ear that this should be acceptable. But it's once again nothing but propaganda on both sides. The gynocracy creates these terms and these ways of describing things to slowly move the goalposts of what's acceptable. That's what people really don't understand about this. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the way one sees themselves, because they know that it's dysfunctional. But the gynocracy was put in place to always challenge masculinity. So it is a check and balance system in order to create and keep and perpetuate dysfunction in the Black community. It's not a check and balance system to necessarily push a individual thing per se, for instance, like eyelashes, but it's meant to push the dysfunctions that come behind eyelashes, such as spending all your money with a group of people who do not care about you on these products. It's meant to keep the dysfunction going, and to get the opposition out of the way, you must critique them in such a harsh way that is greater than which that the gynocracy itself is being critiqued, and that is attacking one's sexuality. Because let's face it, if we were, because we've done this in school plenty of times, if people were arguing or capping on each other is what we used to call it. They were talking about people's shoes, and they were talking about the person haircut. Oh, when they bring in mama, it's a different thing, right? Because that hits upon the gynocracy. You don't critique mama, right? Because that's what we were told growing up. So that ensues a fight. But this is the same version of the propaganda that's being spewed now, because when you critique the essence of what the gynocracy stands for, which most times is a female version of an ideological deity, you are going against mama, right? And that requires a unrealistic and unjustified response, such as socking someone in the face or calling someone gay. But anyways, like, comment, and share. Check me out on Facebook. Check me out on Patreon. But until next time, this has been the Wolf and Beta Close. May you have a good day, and peace be with you.